Hey everyone, Roger Haskett here. We're talking to people in a pandemic and what's going on. Last week and for months, I've been making videos about a pandemic, that little thing that's happening in our world. And instead now, all of that has been pushed to the side. And instead we are dealing with race riots and we're dealing with police brutality. We're dealing with a country, the United States, rising up in protest over the way its citizens are being treated by people in power. Like, what's going on here? Like, I grew up in a time when we talked about racism being abolished. Like, that we are like, oh, like racism, that stupid idea, that you judge people's value based on the color of their skin. Like, how stupid of an idea could there be out there? I thought we had worked to, we were working towards getting rid of it. I didn't think that we were actually working towards having countries like in upheaval because it is so deeply, systematically entrenched. I am clearly a Caucasian guy. I have experienced white privilege my whole life. I have experienced it so much that I don't even know that I'm experiencing it. Let me tell you a story. Let me go to my story camp. So I'm in Mexico when I'm in grade 4. So I'm 9. And I have grown up in Vancouver. So I've grown up in a largely Caucasian, and Asian culture. I grew up in a place where I didn't really see color as an issue. And so we went to Mexico for 6 months. And in 3 of those months, we went to a school that was like supposedly an international school, but it wasn't much. And I was in grade 4, but in the afternoons I was put into the the English class where I was more on their level, which was the highest level. So I was in with kids that were like 14 and 15. And it was boys, like it was all boys and girls on the other side. So I was all boys. And in that class, when I was like, I'm 9 and they're 14 and 15, they're almost double my size. They literally bullied me and tormented me. They'd surround me and call me gringo, and they'd slap glue on my head and neck, and they do all sorts of things just to make my life miserable. And they did. They made it miserable. That little taste is what I experienced from racism, like me experiencing it, because I didn't look the same. And that little bit of experience taught me everything I needed to know about racism. When I came back and I was in grade 6, a friend of mine, Mike, was being tormented by some people because he was, we called it at the time, East Indian. He was South Asian. And he had a turban and he was being hurt. And I just remember being so angry about and I saying to them, he is the exact same as you. We are all the same. You, him, me, we're all the same. He just looks a little different. I was so angry because of all that happened to me in grade 4 came rushing back. And all the anger and fear and hatred and fear that I felt came rushing back. I had a little taste, a little bit of a month experiencing that compared to what other people have to go through their whole life. What are we doing? What are we doing? Like, we know that racism is an idiotic idea. To judge someone's value based on the color of their skin is idiotic. It's as stupid as judging someone by the size of their shoe or the color of their hair. It's idiotic. We know that, and yet here we are. Just as we know that clamping down on protesters does not lead to better democracy, it leads to worse. Now, it sounds like I'm pointing fingers at the United States, and I'm not, because in Canada, we have our own problems with racism. Our Prime Minister just got on, was asked to talk about the states. He quickly pivoted to talk about the fact that we also in Canada have racist issues, and that we have systemic racism as well. That made me extremely proud that my leader was recognizing the reality on the ground for people. But in our country, we have a government in Alberta, which does its best, I think, to model itself on the Trump government, where what they're doing is they just passed a bill where they're taking away the ability to protest against critical infrastructure, which is basically anything oil and gas. So what is that about? Like, what is that about? Is that about really protecting critical infrastructure, or is that really stopping people from standing up and saying what they think? I worry about our world because I see climate change coming and I see the injustice in our world. And now, boy, am I seeing the racism in our world more than ever before. I see these things. Lots of other people see these things. I believe the pandemic is a silver lining in this way. In this way, I think it's a silver lining. Warren Buffett said, and I am not a fan, really, of Warren Buffett or any billionaire at this point. Right? Billionaires are not my favorite people because billionaires right now are far too close to Bond villains. I grew up, again, in a time where I thought Bond villains were jokes. You know, they were jokes in a movie. They were caricatures. But it turns out they're not. They're actually alive, and we have created Bond villains in our world right now. People who are so powerful and wealthy that they literally are more powerful and wealthier than countries. That's just not right. And we know it's not right because look what happens when we create this type of situation. We create injustice and we create disharmony. We create horribleness. So getting back to Warren Buffett, he said something that is smart. He said that when the tide goes out, you see who's naked. Meaning, you know, everyone's swimming around, having a great time, everyone looks great, but the tide goes out and all of a sudden you're like, you're not wearing a bathing suit, like, yucky, ugly nakedness. That's not really fair to nakedness. It's more like, ugliness. So the tide going out is the pandemic. And what's happened is that the pandemic has, as it's come on to us, we're now seeing more and more of the truth of the world. Now, lots of people have seen this truth for a long time, but more and more people are waking up to it. This is the matrix. We're waking up out of the matrix, and we're waking up into the reality of the world. Many, many people would have said a week and a half ago, 2 years ago, that racism was something that was on its way out. Well, we now know that it's clearly not on its way out. I mean, we knew that before as well, but now we cannot deny it. This is the waking up into the matrix. So I believe the pandemic, the silver lining, is that the pandemic is the tide going out. And it allows us all, more and more of us, to see, more and more of us to wake up and see the reality of the world. I call this time the Great Awakening. I call it the rise of the citizen. One of my talks is called the rise of the participant, because I believe that we are all getting trained through engagement to participate more. That we are seeing now more and more citizens rise up and say, I want the country I want, not the country that you've created. Not the country that governments and powerful people and corporations and rich people have created, which is a country, like a system that doesn't respect democracy anymore. So we have to change that. And the only people to change that are who? Us, the citizens, the citizens. Because the people in power, or at least some of the people in power, most of the people in power are not listening. And not only are they not listening, they're actively working against their citizens' own interests. Look around the world. Look at the people, the countries that have botched the pandemic response, and look at the ones that have done the best. The ones that have botched it are dictatorial, autocratic countries. They are countries where for generations, or for years, decades, the people in power have not had to listen to the people they are supposed to represent. And the countries that have done the best with the pandemic are the ones who have the strongest, I believe, the strongest desire and structures to listen and care about their citizens. So what country do you want to live in? Wouldn't you rather live in a country that cares about its citizens? Well, if you want to live in a country that cares about its citizens, then you have to make your country do that, if it doesn't yet. So I say, here we are, the rise of the citizen, the rise of the participant, the rise of the engaged citizen. This comes back to my company, Engagement Unlimited. I believe engagement is more important than ever right now. In a pandemic, right now, more important than ever. And civic engagement with our government is becoming one of the most important things that we can do. And whether that's protesting in a peaceful march and holding signs against police brutality or against racism or against pipelines, this is the democracy that we demand, the ability to say what we think in a democracy. I'm Roger Haskett. We're talking to people in a pandemic, and right now we're talking about engagement, and we're talking about democracy, and we're talking about how they fit together. let's have more engagement with our democracy so that we all have better lives. Not just some, not just the 1%, but that we all benefit.
Subscribe, like, and share, and comment so other people have a chance to engage with this video as well. I'm Roger Haskett. I really appreciate you doing that. Thank you so much.